Do you ever have people in your life that you could listen to them for hours and who you deeply respect? Well, Todd Mitchell is the guest on CPG Brand Builders podcast, and he is awesome. He is one of those mentors that I really look forward to hearing about, just spending any time. And he sat down with me for over an hour, and the wisdom that he shares in this next bit will absolutely change the way that you think about business and your role and how you're operating right now. Welcome to CPG Brand Builders. I'm Braden Douglas, and today I've got an awesome guest, Todd Mitchell, who is one of the founding members of CPG Brand Builders, a wealth of knowledge. This is going to be marketing leadership, executive thinking, because you don't get this chance very often to speak with people who I deeply respect and who I really appreciate from a business perspective, as well as from an integrity perspective. And so I'm going to read his bio, and then Todd, we're going to get right into it because
Sounds good.
This is awesome. So Todd Mitchell is a senior consumer packaged goods executive, operating partner, and board advisor with more than 2 decades of leadership experience, spanning founder-led businesses, private equity-backed companies, and large global enterprises. Today, Todd is an investor in and president of some of the best hummus in the world, Hummus Goodness, executive chair of eGrowcery, and involved with other founders and technology companies to unlock growth. Todd has benefited from continuous education from Harvard's program on negotiation and SMU Cox School of Business program on people leadership. So Todd, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Oh man, I am so excited to have this conversation. So give us just a background of your career, where you've worked, just because you've had an amazing career so far. So what's that journey?
First of all, thanks for the introduction. You know, we're never really as good as we are as the bio that's read about us, but I appreciate the introduction. I started out in a sales family. My dad was in sales. He worked for a lot of large CPG companies. And so I traveled with him to sailing events, sales shows, calling on stores, and all sorts of things. When I graduated, when I was a senior in high school, my dad decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur and he would start his own sales agency. Back then they were known as food brokers. And so when I graduated from high school, my dad said, hey, instead of going to college, would you go, we were in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He said, would you go to El Paso and open an office? So as not quite a 19-year-old yet, you can think, in retrospect, I'm thinking, what was he thinking? At the moment, I thought, sure, this will be fun. So I went to El Paso, opened up an office. At that time, we had probably a dozen clients. I got married very young. A couple of years later, 15 months after that, we had our first child. Wow. And 5 months after that, my mom called one night and said, I hate to tell you, your dad has been thrown from a boat and he's paralyzed from the neck down.
Wow.
So at 22, I was responsible for the totality of my family and a few other families. And Braden, I didn't think much of it. It was just what you had to do.
Right.
And I was fortunate because a lot of people took me under their wing and they helped me. A lot of customers did. My dad, I should say, is almost 90 years old. He's alive today. He regained most of his feeling back. He's in good shape. But I helped grow the business from there. A few years went by and it became apparent that we either needed to expand our geography or sell. And as often happens, those that you wanted to buy weren't for sale, and those that were for sale you didn't want to buy or couldn't buy. So we sold, and I ended up moving from Albuquerque, New Mexico, to El Paso for a moment again, and then to Lubbock, where the seed, if you will. I grew through the ranks in that company. The guy who was the founder, I became like a son to him. And so in my early 30s, I became president of that company. Markets were consolidating in the 90s at that time. And so we were in a small market, so we had to be consolidated. And so we went through another sale. And I then got asked if I would leave Lubbock, Texas, and move to San Francisco, California.
That's a big change.
And run the entire West. It really was.
Wow.
And it was fun. And so I did that for several years. And then in the early 2001, I think it was, I got recruited by a very large agency here in Dallas. And they asked me if I would move here and start a platform that no one else had, which how to manage brands nationally when they had always been managed locally before that. So I did that, and it was a lot of fun. About 3 or 4 years into that, the guy who was running business development in charge of getting either acquiring new businesses or acquiring new clients was promoted to president, and they asked me to run business development. I didn't really want to do that because I never saw myself as a hunter. I saw myself as a farmer, and I love running businesses, if you will. But I did it, and I kind of changed the way we did it. I wanted to know what our pipeline was, what our win-loss ratio was, how long it took to close, wanted to hold people accountable for the days they said it would close, who are they talking to, what's the contract value, and that proved to be pretty successful. And then I sat down with the CEO, and we determined that if my group, which at that time had about $3 million worth of cost, if we could generate $15 million worth of contract value and margin every single year, then we could grow organically without the acquisition cost. We were buying businesses 5 to 6 times earnings at that time, so it was wonderful. And then we could use available capital to buy resources and buy talent and buy skills that we didn't have, and it worked wonderful. On that journey, because I had a relationship with existing clients, I met lots of people who weren't our clients, and I just like people, and I stay in contact with them and built lots of relationships. So when the guy who was president was going to take an early retirement, they asked me to go into that role, and I really, really enjoyed that role. And that was about 2010. We had a great year in 2010, a great year in 2011, a great year in 2012.
Is this Crossmark?
It is.
Yeah.
In 2012. And then the 4 primary owners decided they wanted to put the company up for sale. And so that was a great experience working with bankers and people who wanted to buy us. And there were 3 people at the end, and one ended up coming through, Warburg Pincus, who I think is a wonderful company, bought the asset in the end of 2012. And I was the one who stayed as president, and that was great. What I learned in that moment is that, and it was naivety on my part, I thought everybody understood that a people-centric business worked different than a product-centric business. And they brought in an outside CEO who is a wonderful man, smart, good family man, maybe the smartest person I've met, but he didn't understand the nuances of a people-centric business. And he wanted to change everything, the way we interacted with our clients, our customers, our financial structure, and the technology that we used to collect data while we were in the stores all at once.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going to him and saying, we need to break some dishes. I was the lone executive team member that was said, go talk to him because we think this is dangerous.
They send you in to have the hard conversation.
And I said, but we can't break the dishes. We can't break China. And he said, don't worry about it. Every place I go, I rip the Band-Aid off. New fresh blood comes in, the skin is stronger than ever before, and we grow. So I left thinking, well, clearly he has more experience than I do. And that didn't work out very well. And so about a year after that, I said, time for me to go. Because I couldn't convince him that people behave different. Because I'm not very good at divorce. I told him that in July. It was February the following year where we finally agreed that I really should go.
So what was the difference between the people-led business and a product? Like what was that? What were those nuances?
Your brand or your people. Your brand is not a product. And you're not pushing a brand out there. And people behave different. They have a heart. They have feelings. They have preconceived notions. You can't just tell them, I'm going to put you like a Frito factory and you're going to come out just like the other person. And you have to consider those things. And clients, when you have 1,000 of them, they have relationships with individual packages, if you will, not with the sum of the parts. And so that was a huge difference. And I left, and I've done a lot of things. I've helped other boards on, I was recruited by a board to help with the business on some things with succession planning, which I did. I went and ran a digital marketing company so I could learn about Amazon. That was a lot of fun. I helped a guy that I knew, actually business. This will tell you how great of a salesperson I am. I tried to buy his business when I was at Crossmark, and I couldn't convince our board that e-commerce was actually going to be a way that people procure a product. So that tells you how good of a salesperson I am. And so I went and ran his business for a while. I really enjoyed that. And quite honestly, Braden, his and my values collided, and he knew that I was immovable on those. And so since then, as you mentioned, I've been involved in lots of things. I'm an executive chair of a technology company. I'm also part owner in a blockchain company that is really changing the way the financial system works, which we'll have to see how that works in the next 10 years. Several other brands. But I also spend a fair amount of time today with young or new CEOs. I don't need to tell you that that's a hard job. Everybody thinks it's the best job because you get to make all the decisions until you have to make all the decisions. And they're hard. And sometimes it's not really clear. I remember in one business I was in, I was a CEO of a business unit of about a $4 billion company, and it's the middle of COVID, and we had decided as an executive team to do some things around COVID. A guy that worked for me, he said, "Todd, I would not do that." And I said, "How do you know?" And he said, "I just know. I would not do that." And I said, "Well, but I didn't ask you that. I asked you, how do you know?" He said, "I just know if I were CEO, which our global CEO was making, said, I wouldn't do that." And I said, "You've never been CEO. You don't know what it's like to have two really bad decisions.
Yeah.
And you're going to gamble on one versus the other." And so today, because of those experiences, I spend a lot of time with people and try to help them and nurture them and help them come. I play devil's advocate and I play support system on those things. But I quite honestly really, really, really enjoy this season of life.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Now, I know you're one of the best people guys that I've met just from an executive standpoint. And a lot of people watching this are going to be other people managers, they're going to be leading teams, maybe organizations. What advice would you give them on how to work and get the best out of people? Like if we are coaching them, what do you start with, and how do you help them in a very easy way of saying, okay, these are the principles that I would look at?
Maybe a better way is to tell you what grounds me. And I think of this conversation I have with my grandchildren. And when they turn 16, of which I have 3 that are over that age, there are 3 things I tell them. Number 1 is decide who you want to be. Not what you want to be, but who you want to be. And I pull out in my wallet, which I've carried with me for 30 years, a set of values that are important to me, and I share that with them. And I tell them to write it down and never, ever, ever compromise. And when they do, forgive themselves and start all over. I also tell them to find a relationship with something that's bigger than them. And I am a huge proponent in faith. And I want them to make sure that they have a resource that's outside of just their own mind. And then the third is a little bit self-serving. I tell them to save 10 cents of every dollar they ever make for the rest of their life. Don't spend it on houses, cars, vacations, or anything. Invest it, and they'll have financial freedom, and they'll never overspend their life. So with that as a background, I really begin by telling people that companies, that they have to decide who they want to be. And so part of that is in a leadership, who do you want to be? What do you want to emulate? Because so many times people will mimic, if you will, caricatures, parts of other people that they see. And then they see some bravado that takes place, and so they think that's how they have to be. Or they see false modesty, and they think that's how they have to be. And I think that people have to come to grips is, who do they want to be? And if I'm honest, I think that people should only follow people who the CEO has a value structure that mirrors them, or else they'll have a conflict for that. So I tell leaders, once they get around that, and if I can align with that, then listen. ask questions. People used to laugh at me because I always ask lots of questions.
Yeah.
And people would say, "Are you trying to catch somebody?" I said, "No, I'm trying to learn because I don't know." And I think that's the thing is leaders think they have to have all of the answers. None of us do. We have to have lifelines. We have to ask. And I believe that the janitor can have as good of a recommendation as somebody else. And so ask questions, listen, synthesize it through your value structure, what the company is trying to accomplish, which gets to the importance of a strategic plan and all those things. And we'll probably get into conversation of that. But you have to pass it through those filters. But most importantly, if you listen to people and ask questions, you will get the very best out of them because two things will happen. You'll find out how they're thinking, and then they will know you have listened to them. And if you go back and if you say, "Hey, Braden, I heard you. I did. And you're going to hear an announcement, and here's what this is going to be. And here's why I made that decision, but here's where you influence that decision. And I thank you very much for your input." You didn't get everything that you wanted because you can't, right? However, you heard, wow, he or she values me. He or she is listening to me. He or she knows they don't have all of the answers. And you know what? There's more trust that's built as a result of that.
So why do you think more leaders don't do that? Do you think they just haven't taken the time to create their own values, or they feel so pressured with decisions that they just steamroll ahead? Like, where do you see that breakdown?
About 15 years ago, I sat down for dinner with a guy named Steve Demos. He founded Horizon Milk, and then he bought Silk. And I remember sitting down at dinner, and I think I was running business development, and we had people higher than I was in there that were there. And he sat down and he looks at me and he says, "So people are motivated by fear or greed. Which one are you?" And I thought that was a fascinating question. It was a great conversation starter,
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure. To answer your question, I think most of us are motivated by fear. Fear of, uh-oh, I don't have the right answer. Fear of, uh-oh, what if I'm wrong? And probably the most liberating thing to me over time, and it took me a while to learn it, because you can call it fear, you can call it ego. Both of those have worked against me in my own life, is to be able to say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, and here's what I'm going to do to remedy it," to me, without expecting anything from the other person, is even more powerful than "I love you," which gets thrown around a whole bunch. So from a leadership standpoint, because typically as leaders, you're surrounded by people who have to work for a living. And so they're not as interested in you. They're as interested in their making sure that their mortgage gets paid and their car gets paid. And I'll pause. And there was a moment in time, and we probably won't get into this, that I fired my brother.
Wow.
And I forced my dad to retire from the company.
Oh,
I have one dad and one sibling. And my dad, because the business had outgrown him, and we made a smooth landing for him. But my brother, I fired him, and he said, "I'm your brother. How can you fire me?" And I said, "Danny, we have 35 people in this company. They don't really care about you and me. What they care about is whether I'm going to be able to do the things that will make sure that they can pay for their kids' education, food on the table, and their mortgage. And you're not doing your job, and you know that. They know that." And I think having that grounding as a leader in values, being okay with being wrong, or equally as important, not having to be right, those are two different things, right? Is, I think, very important. And leaders sometimes think that. I think leaders sometimes don't think through the implications of things as well as they should, because sometimes it's just, "I have this decision, let me make it," and they don't think about the domino effect that happens.
So let's say I'm leader right now, because even for me, I'm like, okay, Todd, well, what do I need to start with? if you're coming now to say, you know what, I want to choose today, I want to be a better leader. I want to really have a better grip on the business side, the people side. Where should I start?
I think there are a few things that are non-business related that are really important. I can't emphasize how important it is for people to have values, and most companies, most, most have values, and it gets set on a wall and no one ever pays attention to them.
True.
And so living those values, understanding who you are is really important. I can't tell you for me how important it is to have exercise, as strange as that is. And I tell everybody what started, I've been exercising 5, 6 days a week for 48 years. And what started as vanity worked into survival. But some of my best thinking happened. I remember when I became president, the guy who was CEO, he said, he used to see me in the morning working out, and he would say, "You're not going to be able to do this anymore." And I said, "I'm going to have to, or I can't do my job." So I think that clarity, however people get it, some get it through meditation, prayer. I think some combination of all of those things are important. And the part I failed on was sleep. And when I left Crossmark, one of my dear friends who worked for me said, "You're gonna have to learn to sleep." Because it was ego for me. I'd wake up 3:30, 4 in the morning. I'd go work out. I'd be at my desk between 6 and 6:30. If I was in town, I'd have dinner at 6. I'd be home by 8:30 or 9 at night. I'd do the same thing the next day. I worked half days on Saturdays. I was a machine. He said, "You're gonna have to or you're gonna die." I remember the comment, and I'm like, "Whoa." So my point is to start what makes the very best version of Braden
Right.
or Todd. What is the combination of those things that does so? And then from a leader standpoint, you've got to have a vision for your company. Where are you going? And where are you going? And then a mission. And sometimes those get confused. I love that for years, Pepsi's mission was beat Coke. It doesn't always have to be that difficult, right?
Yeah.
But then having a set of things that says, here's what we're going to do to make our business successful. Of course, the bigger it is, you need to have 3 to 5 to 8 years, and it needs to adjust. But I think that having clarity as to where you're going, why you're going, and how you're going to go grounds leaders. I also think that as a leader, empowering people to do things. When I became president, I said to the 4 owners, I said, "What are my decision rights?" So, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what rights do I get to make? What decisions do I get to make?" And they go, and so ultimately they gave me the same decision rights they have. There were 5 or 6 of them, but it added such clarity, and it gets back to there's a few things, just a few questions that simplify so many different things. One of the first things I did is I resigned about 90 clients because we had people that said there was so much noise. It represented 1.5% of my business. You know, there was the chief legal counsel said that's a board decision. The board said, no, that's his decision. But what it did is it allowed me to go tell my team, I think we have about 900 clients. It allowed me to go tell my team, I've reduced the noise by 15%. So you have more clarity now. You don't have to make any headcount reduction. Let's just go grow the business. And I'm not naive to think that they probably weren't doing a lot for those 100 clients. And that's what some people said. And I said, well, that's worse because that hurts our brand. And I said, but what I did see was people mentally were able to take a weight off of their shoulders, and it just helped them to do so. So back to the leadership is understand which decisions you need to make and which decisions you don't need to make. Because everyone will come to you.
Yeah.
It just happens. And then asking, what do you think we should do? And if they say, I don't know, well, who do you think outside of me would be able to do that, would be able to make that decision? They may say, Josh, I'll use this, and say, great, let's bring Josh into the conversation. You're beginning to teach people to think and to make decisions in the framework that they know, because if you live your values, they know what those are. If they know what the vision is, they know what those are. If they know where you want to go this year, they know what those are. If they know what needs to be accomplished, they know what those are.
Yes.
And I think that is really important. I would say one last thing, a term that a CEO who came on after I left, Crossmark, I hated this statement, but I've grown to love this statement, is he said, let's not admire the problem. And too many times people go out, whoa, oh, look at this. And I think the best question is two things. What should we do about it? So you force them to do so. And then let them work their way through. And sometimes I would say, what should we do about it? And they would say, I don't know. And I would say, well, what do you think you need to do to be able to make that decision? Blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I did have to do this, right? But 90% of the time I didn't. And then they would come back with a plan. I'd say, great. How can I help? And they might say, hold me accountable, which I love those people, right? They may say, I need to make sure these barriers are blocked. Great, I love those people. But I think part of leadership is people think that they have to be the end-all, be-all. And if you can spread that out around more people, the health of the organization, the talent in the organization expands, their confidence level. They know, I can do this. They know what you're going to like and not like in the decision. And so they're either going to mitigate that coming in or they're going to avoid it altogether.
Yeah. I love that. Don't admire the problem. That's a great one. So here's a question though. Let's say you had a vision or you have one, but you know what? The world changes, things are moving and morphing. How often should you reset that and keep reinforcing that? Is it quarterly? Is it annually? Is it, does it last for 5 years? Like, what do you see then?
About a month ago, one of the partners at Spencer Stewart put out a piece that I thought was really good. And he came out on LinkedIn and he said he had been meeting with several CEOs, big CEOs, and they wanted to know what type of succession planning and CEO would they need in their company for the next 6 to 8 years, because that's the life of a CEO, if you will. And he said, this may be unpopular, but I think business is changing so fast, you should look out about 18 months at a time.
Yeah.
So my point to that is I think it's smart to have a 3 to 5 year plan. I really do. But I also think it's important to spend time every single year assessing how those things have changed. I mean, I had a friend of mine the other day, I was asking him if he used AI. He was hiring some people, and I said, you should think about where AI can replace some of those. You can create some agents. And he didn't know what an agent was, right? And then, so I talked to him about that. And then he said, yeah, I know AI is the future. I said, no, Mike, AI is today. And I think that I'll stop, and I think this is the thought that comes to my mind is probably 15 years ago, a friend of mine, Tom Corley, was president of Kraft. And Marissa Myers, who was at Facebook at that time, came in and she was addressing their executive team. And so she got up and she said, man, I'll bet you guys have seen a lot change in your life. And I'll go, yeah. And you said, I bet there was a time you could leave the office and people couldn't get a hold of you unless they called you at home. I said, yeah. Then they had these things called answering machines that were so new age, and they'd put an answer on there and you'd get it and you'd do this. Yeah. You had a voicemail at your office and they could do it. Yeah. And then you had the phone. And of course, she's bringing everybody along. And she said, and today, we're always connected. And they go, yeah. She said, just imagine, business will never move as slow in your lifetime as it does today. So I think that reality that takes place and the recognition that you have to be nimble, that you have to be able to build your business in such a way that meets the needs of business, but is prepared to pivot to the needs tomorrow. Think of how many decisions come in and you go, wow, I thought we were going to do this, but we need to do this in order to get to this ultimate vision that we have.
Oh yeah. Well, even for us right now, we're looking at how do we become AI awesome? That's what we're calling it. It's AI awesome because it's now. How do you, for organizations or people who are not necessarily using it, what do you tell executives? Like, where should they start to think, you need to start investing in that. You need to start doing this. Like, what are you seeing to your companies that you're coaching and investing in?
I begin very small. I ask them, do you use AI today? And they say, some say yes, some say no. And I said, how much do you use chat? So it's like anything else. Get familiar with chat. Go in there. I said, I use a tool that puts chat, Claude, Gemini, Copilot all together because I want a varying opinion. If you're not careful on chat, it's going to tell you exactly what you want to hear, and it'll have happy talk. And so then I tell them to take it and create a counter intuitive to it so that they're asking, what have I forgotten? Or what if this is wrong? What should I think about? And you get people to think about, invariably, Braden, they come back and they say, oh my goodness, I'm now putting my emails in, I'm putting my board decks in, I am putting letters that are important to shareholders, I'm putting all these things in there and writing it in such a way, and it's wonderful because it's helping me think about it different. And then I stop and say, okay, what are all of the other areas of business that you can apply that to? So a couple weeks ago, this blockchain company I'm involved with, they have a part that works through security for SEC approvals. It's a separate company. And I'm talking to their CEO. He's 34 years old. He is a rocket scientist. He had worked on planes before. Smart guy. And I would have to admit to you, I talked to him for about an hour and a half. If I absorbed 10%, my Lord, that would be really great in the process. But I asked him, I said, what kind of agents do you have? He has like 17 people in his whole company. And he's got Apple people on his board. And I said, what do you have? And he said, Todd, I created, and he gave me some prompts for this. I've created an agent CMO, an agent CFO, an agent operations person, and even an agent CEO. And I have them talk to each other. And I only get involved in the things that they can't solve between the three of the four of them.
That's awesome.
It is.
Yeah,
And
amazing.
it's hard for us to get our brains around.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think Doug McMillon said this at Walmart. They are a people-powered, tech-enabled company. And the thing that people lose sight of, I think, is the human aspect of all things. I watched my grandkids in my house, and they text each other, sitting by each other, for goodness sakes. But I think the part, if we're not careful, the human element of that will be lost. I remember a time in my life when, my goodness, when Harvard Graphics, 1,000 years ago, and people thought you were going to send your presentation to a buyer, the buyer was going to look at it, and with all of this wonderful data go, oh my gosh, this is brilliant, I think I'll buy it. Well, it's the and. What happened is you need that, and you need somebody that can interact with that buyer, answer their questions on the spot, and that they can trust, can go back and ask other questions to. And so I am one who, not yet, I'm not saying not ever, I'm just saying not yet do I think that everything in the world will be digitized. I think that that is going to enable certain parts of the business that don't absolutely require a human spirit or a human interaction. And then that will free up, because that's labor dollars, it free up to be able to hire talent that can interface with clients, the customers.
It's true. I do think that we're going to see the human connection side, and that's where we're pushing our agency to as well. So there's going to be some AI enabled stuff, and in the marketing industry, we're calling it slop because there's lots of junk content. It's being thrown out there, but real good human connection is going to be. I think it's going to be really still needed for sure.
Years ago, we had a person who was brought in from the outside, head of HR. And so many times people will say, or. She says, and. She was, and. And as I say that, it reminded me, we're in this environment. There's a lady named Cy Wakeman that has a book called No Ego. And it's It's a great read. She's recently retired, but I brought her in as we were going through a structure our company did, I should say. Head of HR actually brought her in, but I became friendly with her. And one of the guys on my team got up and he just said, she said, "Tell me the challenges you have." And you go, blah, 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 blah. And he was just explaining all the challenges he had. And she said something that I thought was profound. She said, "Dan, your circumstances are not the reason you can't succeed. Your circumstances are the reality in which you must succeed." And what she did is she made him take ownership instead of abdicating what was going on around. And I think that we're going to have to do that from a business. Yes, you have to use AI because everybody expects you to, right? There's part of that. Yes, you're going to employ it in your business because it's going to be smart for your business. But I still think that people want to do business with people. It's the same reason Walmart had headed down this path where self-checkout. And some of the Walmart board members had been and founders had been in the store, and they saw people in line, moms with kids, older people that didn't want to do it. And all the data showed that they should go to self-scanning. And they said, no, the people are going to need this. And so that's why you see more of a balance around it. Of course, today you've got a higher rate of pilferage that they've also found as a result of all of that.
Yeah, they
But
could.
originally, it was designed for speed of getting people out the door, and we don't need self-checkout, so we're not gonna have all these people doing this. But you know what? You need it. You need it because people need it.
That's true. I love that. Well, one of the things that when I first met you, you had this saying like heart hustle,
Yes,
right?
sir.
This thing, right? That was I think it's on your email signature. It's like
Yes, sir.
you kind of talk about it. You even got swag, I think, made up with it now. And so tell me, where did it come from? What does it really mean? How do you use it in your everyday?
That's a great question. Um, you know, being a leader is equal parts inspiration, trust, and leadership, and accountability. And sometimes people go one side or the other, and myself too. I'm either one side. So it's a reminder to me that you got to hustle, you got to move fast, you got to make decisions, you got to have accountability, you got to own it yourself. But you have to have a heart too, and you have to listen. And you can see when people are um, they're either stuck or they've gone as far as they can go. And you need to remove them from that situation, which is really hard, right? Especially if you create a relationship with them. But that's very important. You have the heart to not put them through the grind that they're not capable of going. So dealing with that in a very heartfelt way and dealing with people in a way. But at the same time, part of the job of a leader, a big part of the job of the leader is having accountability so that the company accomplishes the goals that have been set out for it.
So when you're working with leaders, do you see some managers that have more heart, less hustle, more hustle, less heart? Like, and how do you coach on each of them? How do you know which one you're leaning into too much? Because I would say in my background, man, I probably sometimes have too much heart and don't keep some people accountable enough. And that's can be an issue. Or sometimes you're just driving so hard that you leave people in the wake by accident. What do you see in that?
Like so many things, let me tell you a story,
Yeah.
okay? This is really in the middle, and it's not related to business, but uh, I live in an area that has an HOA. It's owned by today, the developer is head of the HOA. And all the neighbors are upset because there's a couple of neighbors that have gone outside of the perimeters, right? And the guy who runs the HOA has sent them a note, and the neighbors are saying, yeah, this guy, I won't use his name, this guy has tried all that he can. And this guy over here just basically, blew him off. And so what else is he supposed to do? The heart. They feel sorry for him. I said, it's his fault because he allowed it. We are what we allow. And so It's just like a child who behaves disrespectfully. And if the parent doesn't correct that behavior and says they didn't eat, they didn't sleep, that's why I think the arrangement between a mom and a dad is so great, right? And usually the dad is going to be less empathetic and the mom's going to be more empathetic. And the answer is someplace in the middle, right? Because maybe they didn't eat, but that still should not be disrespectful. The same is true in business. And so you know this. You can talk to people and you can see where they have a bent towards.
Yeah.
And most of us don't have a permanent bent. Most of us has situational bent where we're looking at something. And I think about a founder CEO I was talking to the other day who was upset about something. And I said, same thing I said earlier. I said, so what are you going to do about it? Well, that's the hard part. Most people want to talk about it. Most people want to talk about it, but the hard part is actually doing something about it and then working through it. In this particular case, somebody owed him a large sum of money that's been dragging on for a year. And I said, you should send them a note and tell them that since you've already paid taxes on this money, you just don't have the cash and it's been distributed elsewhere, that you expect it by this date. And he said, okay, and then what? And I said, well, and then what? Then you need to have your attorney write a note to them and tell them that here's what this is. Because right now you have trained this person, because it's gone on for over a year, that it's okay and they'll get around to it. And that's the way it'll be until it happens. I think the same is true with leadership. There needs to be things that are, I understand the situation, right? So there's the empathy. I understand the situation. I have been in your shoes. However, this is what we must do in order to move forward. And and then not this is where leaders make the business. And they go because "Phew, the hard part is over." No, it is, let me sit down with you. I'd love to review it with you in a couple of weeks. Tell me what the plan is for it. Okay, after that, tell me where we are. And you have to make sure that whatever it is you want to have done was changed. And they realize it wasn't an event, it is a process of which you're going to adhere by.
Right. So, and I'm probably guilty of this too, is as a leader, you have so many things going on.
Mhm.
And when you start a new process, sometimes you don't always carry it through. So do you think it's better then to say do less? Do you schedule those meetings in advance? You kind of keep working on it that way. How do you combat the entrepreneurial ADD potentially that some leaders can get?
We all have that. We do. The old saying that you can't accomplish as much as you think you can in a year, but you can accomplish more than you can in 5. Those are true. I think that, um, I think you have to understand what your organization has the capability to do, number 1, right? Number 2 is, okay, if we have the capability to do this so that we can gain institutional confidence in it, what is the first thing that we have to do that then can build from there? And then do that and let everybody know that once this is done, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. Too many leaders are shiny pennies. They talk to somebody, they tell them this is good, and they have no idea the real construct in which it was good and how it worked or whether it was a unique situation. None of those things. They think it's good. They go, yeah, we need to do this, right? And I think that the challenging thing for a leader is to say, foundationally, what is the next brick or set of bricks that I need to lay so that my organization is prepared to do the next set of things that it needs to do with. When I was at Crossmark, um, we never had town halls prior to me coming into the role. And I remember flying back for the first town hall I was going to do, and I was going to do it just for my office. There's about 3,000 people on there, not huge, but not small. And I'm flying back, and I'm thinking to myself, how do I get people organized around a theme of things? And So I'm on the plane talking to our chief communications guy, and I'm saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I came back with a phrase, edge, and each one had a meaning to it that fit to everything that we wanted to do. And there was some psychological thing in there. We weren't winning in the marketplace before that. And I wanted us to get some momentum because I realized my own team needed to have confidence in what they were doing. And if you could build confidence, I just know how powerful confidence is. And so we talked about it on every meeting. When somebody did something, I celebrated one of those things. Each of our offices, we had probably 40 of them around the United States at the time. Each one of them, then we created an etching that had edge on it and what it meant. And there were people who put signs in there, and each of the local team leaders began to talk about it. But it also became a behavioral thing as to what it would do. I mean, the E was for engage, right? The first E was for engage. I wanted people to be engaged with the client's business. I used to tell them, I want our clients to know we're thinking about how to grow their business
Yeah.
before they even pick up the phone. The D was for determined. I want you to be determined to get to right. I want you to break down the barriers. I don't want to understand the obstacles. I want to understand what do we need to do to break those down. The G is for growth. And growth is not our business. I know we sell all of these services and we go check mark every single time we fill a client in with one of those things. But I have this novel idea that if we actually grow our client's business, they will engage with us more. And so growth driven was a third. And E was exceptional. I said, I really want us to show up someplace dressed just a little bit nicer than the environment, not too much. But more importantly, I want to leave a client meeting so that we have taught them something about their business they didn't know before we got in here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think about that often, but think about that, Braden. That was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think part of that is just getting people organized around it.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, okay, switching gears to, companies, brands that are doing really well today. Who are you seeing that you're like, you know what, they're doing something really good? And like, what are kind of those kind of things that stand out to you?
A brand that I work with early on, I'll start with them. We represented them in my previous life when they were very, very small, was Chobani. And one of the things, when Peter McGinnis came in as CMO, he started talking about yogurt as a food. And I thought that was really, and he talked about it internally. And Hamdi went and built the Soho Cafe or the Chobani Cafe in Soho. And they started mixing products, a savory with sweet. You might have a pistachio or yogurt with pistachios in it, and you would eat it with a tortilla chip. And it just made people think about things differently. And yeah, they came along and they had a different type of a product. It had protein and it created a cult following among moms, period, full stop. But it could have stopped there, except for they started to talk about it in yogurt being a food. And I see other companies, I see Daisy Sour Cream doing that today. I see A Good Culture doing that today. Grunes has come out, which a really cool product, just sold in the last couple of days to Unilever, which I think is a really cool product. Siete started out as a product, and I think it was started out as a name of grain-free chips or something like that. And Bill Weiland, who is the founder of President's Marketing, told me, yeah, that's not going to work. And he said, what do you mean? So I came back and said, how about Siete? There's 7 family members involved, and we'll do that. And he said, yeah, that's good. But they created a really cool niche that was anti-big business. And, we're in an environment today where the big CPG companies have got to figure out how they operate as a big company, but don't behave as a big company. And I was going to say perceive, but I think it's not a facade. I think it is, they've actually got to follow it. I was disappointed to hear recently that Annie's, which I thought General Mills did a great job, but now they've brought in some of the things they do in their other products, and it's infiltrated it. But I would have said Annie's does good. I think Amy's Food have done a very good job in some of the products that they do. I worry about some of the other brands, and I won't mention them because I don't want to be disrespectful, that have come onto the scene, and all of a sudden in 3 to 5 years, they are worth, billions of dollars, and everybody, they sell to somebody and everybody celebrates them. And they found a niche, they did good, they sold it, and they made a lot of money. That is very different than really building a brand.
Right.
I think in the Daisy, it's I don't know whether it still is. It used to be headquartered in Dallas. The guy who was the founder was a little peculiar, but my goodness, it's been for years, and they just slowly built the business and done a really good job with it.
Oh, yeah.
I think Califia, and I'm not sure if you say it, Califia
Califia or
or
Califia?
Califia.
I think it's Califia because it's California. I'm pretty sure it's gotta be.
I've heard it in both ways. A guy by the name of Dave Ritterbush is the CEO there. I watched Dave when he was at Premier Brands. He's very thoughtful, very pragmatic, and I watched them expand into other areas. Look, it's hard. As I talked to the guy yesterday from Moolala?
Oh, yeah, Moolah, yeah.
Moolah.
Yeah.
I really liked Adam, smart guy. That's a tough category,
Mhm.
which the irony is we were talking about branding
Yeah.
and packaging. And he said, Todd, we changed our packaging. We didn't change anything on the inside. We did our packaging from what was cartoonish so people wouldn't take us serious. And he said our consumption's up 175%, which is fascinating,
Yeah, it is.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of brands that are doing things good. It really depends on what people, are they trying to build a brand or are they trying to sell a company?
Right.
And typically the people who are just trying to sell a company, it's not going to be as purely authentic as someone who has tried to build a brand. Look, the people are, Steve Demos said, and Steve, can't remember his last name, he would shoot me for this. But anyway, they did Horizon, and they did Silk, and then they ended up selling it to Dean Foods at the time. But they did a really good job of building a really good brand.
Oh, yeah. I still remember it, even Horizon and Silk. Like, those are fantastic. You mentioned Chobani because my brother, Nate, who's in crew, loves Chobani. He was at Parmalat in Canada, always kind of looking at that growth and things. But you mentioned that Chobani, and I've heard this before, is that this is one of the first times they took sales and marketing, put them really together in demand generation,
They did.
right? And just kind of reimagined how sales and marketing work together. Do you know anything about that, like that background and
I
stuff?
do. Peter was the guy who did that. So Peter was CMO, and then he became president of the company. And he recognized there's always this fight, right? The salespeople said, the marketing people would make things that we could sell, we'd be great. And the marketing people say, man, we make great things. These salespeople can't do it. Where when you put the voice of marketing and the voice of sales in front of the customer and they get to hear what's working and what's not, you really begin to break down some of those barriers that take place. And it's been an evolution over time. You have sales planning, which was always the bridge. That was the financial bridge that put it together because, the money generated from the brands and then sales gets allocated. That's how that typically went. And so that was in the middle. And what happened is just the need to bring those things closer. I also see, Braden, more CEOs, more heads of marketing in front of customer meetings, more, and it's been going on, for a decade or more in a more meaningful way. But you can just see those walls collapse a little bit.
Well, I think that the proliferation of innovation within CPG, the need for, like, almost every meeting, hey, what do you have new? What do you have
Yes.
new? It's this constant new SKUs. So when it comes to innovation, what do you see? How should brands, even because small brands, they don't have a ton of capital, that can be disruptive. They need to do it. Even larger ones maybe get too comfortable. They don't take the risks anymore, whatever it might be. But what's your take on innovation and how brand leaders should view that?
I think there's different types of innovation. I remember when Don Knaus was leading Clorox, and he said, he said, we have an arsenal full of products here, but the ingredients are all the same. And he said, so what we need to do is figure out how people can use them differently. And part of that is packaging
Hmm.
and delivery vehicle. So I think that there are a variety of ways to look at things. I think pure innovation is good. If I think back to, I would say you should listen to the consumer, but I remember when consumers 15 years ago said they wanted organics, but they weren't going to pay for it, right? And so you kind of have to let things morph their way through. But I think that people should look at innovation as packaging and delivery because you already have the same product that is there aside from just line extensions. I think what I'm going to follow what Kraft is doing today on the Heinz label, where they're proliferating their condiments, right? They got all of these things, and when it's all said and done, I don't know whether that space that the retailer puts these products in is actually moving more dollars. If you've got 50% more items and you're moving the same dollars, it's costing you money because you got to stock 50% more items that are in there. And so I think those are some of the things that need to be thought. And also, innovation, people think about sometimes as complex, and it doesn't. It could be simple. It really can. And not all innovation is great. Chobani thought that the smoothies were going to be great, and they've had starts and stops with those all over the place.
Yeah. So where would you say for a company to focus in on? Like, do you go with format first and say, you know what, let's make sure, take the same thing, let's get multi-pack, let's get larger format for different channels, because obviously you have line extensions like flavors and things, but when should a brand start to think, you know what, maybe this we could have a brand extension. Maybe we need to look outside of our category and have adjacent pieces, or like where should a company start to, when do you say do you get to that point where you're like, okay, we need some bigger bets?
I don't know the numerical value, but you have to have enough critical mass in order to be able to do that. You also have to have enough space on the shelf so that your brand can be recognized. Um, I think the number is like 600 million items today on Amazon. There's a lot of noise. 12 million of them are Amazon stocked. 12 million. Typical Walmart store has between 150 and 200,000 items, and the same is true for Target. So consumer walks down the aisle, he or she's carrying a kid, or they're in a hurry, they got to get home, all these things, they're looking at something. And so you have to have, I think about the olive oil category today, and there's a gazillion specialty oils that are on there with one facing. Honestly, Braden, I don't know how the consumer makes a decision
Oh
on
yeah.
that. So I think that you have to, if you're building a brand, unless you have extreme uniqueness, you have to have enough items to capture the space that is there. You need to do that. And then as time goes on, is your velocities warrant an extension? And you're right, customers want to know, okay, what's next? Because so many categories since COVID have been stagnant. There's not been a lot of really good innovation. And look, invested capital has had to shift into 20 other different ways, and they don't have the money to do that. And once that genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to go put it back in there. But I think that you've got to think about that as to what is the space my brand has permission to win in. Not all brands have permission to win in other spaces. But when your velocity gets to a point, then you need to think about, well, I'm only going to get, because these stores aren't getting any bigger. Retailers have geography, real estate to sell, and they do, and they have to get so much out of it. Are you better off to take another facing or two from your highest velocity items because the consumer has already said it and you'll get more inventory and you'll sell more of something the consumer wants, or to come out with a new item? And so I think that, as you know, I'm involved with Hummus Goodness, and one of the things we're talking about is seasonal things. So you bring something in from a seasonal standpoint, it's really cool. I think about pumpkin spice. Good grief, pumpkin spice creamers came on for, what was it, the middle of November to December 25th and it was gone, and now it's September through February.
I mean, that's Starbucks, man. They just
Yeah,
they made pumpkin spice what it is.
It's
Like,
all over the place. So I know I didn't answer your question, but I think that you have to think about production efficiencies, inventory of product that it takes to make it. How is that going to interfere with the rest of your supply chain that takes place? Is the retailer, more retailers today are out of space in their warehouses.
yeah.
And so many times they'll come to you and say, great, you have 5 items, you want to put 2 in, which one are you going to take out? You get a net gain of 1, but then you have to decide, wow, do I really think these 2 items are going to trump the one I'm going to take out that people are already buying?
That's true. Yeah, those are big decisions for sure. No, that's crazy. So here's the question. You brought up on one of our CPG brand builders cohorts this idea of risk.
Mhm.
And it was a comment. I don't know if everybody picked it up on it, but I definitely did because I'm like, there's something deeper behind there. But where do you see with leaders, whether at inside of organizations, do you find them taking less risk and being more, say, career protectionist versus when they should be, you know what, you need to, there's certain times where you need to actually go on a limb to do that. And what, maybe just unpack that a bit. Do you remember saying that?
I do. And the answer to your question is yes. Most people who are CEOs are so thankful to be in that job, and many of them know that look, you've been fired the day you were put in the job. As PepsiCo used to say, when you join, the firing pin hits the bullet, you just have to see how fast you can run, right? And so they know that, and it it reminds me a little bit. Years ago, I called a friend of mine when I wanted to outsource something, and I was gonna do it to IBM, and he said, "Todd, no one ever gets fired for hiring IBM." And I did it, and it's worked, and it was great. But I think back now, why did I do it? I did it because I had so much uncertainty, and this was a big risk. And yeah, I'm probably not going to get fired for hiring IBM. I think it goes back to our original conversation about values. Why do you want to be a leader? Why? Why? And is it dollars and cents? Is it for admiration? Is it because you think you've worked long enough that you earn it? Well, those are really good conversations for succession planning with people because you get to find out what happens. If you find somebody that thinks that they can really make a difference in people's lives, therefore in the business life, and you can look back at people's history to see whether they were risk adverse or not. And I personally think we all are courageous and we're all risk adverse. It just depends on the insecurities that we have at that particular moment. And so, but there are moments like now with AI and what you're doing, right? That, you know what? You're on a limb that you don't really know an awful lot about. You just know you have to get out there. And I think that's really important. Young entrepreneurs starting businesses and they think, I've got a really great product. Well, you know this. It requires a lot of work for a long time with a lot of failures along the way to get to what this dream you have in your mind.
Yeah.
Most people don't have the tenacity to do that. And the other thing I think of when it comes to risk is it's okay to be wrong. And that's hard for people, but it's okay. Just recognize it and change it.
Yeah.
But it's okay to, and that's the thing is people are fearful of being wrong. And so because of that, they become protectionists and they fail to make the decisions that are needed to be made.
I think, and a lot of marketers that I know too, is that if we just do the right process, they almost hide behind process versus, but you can run a bad idea through the right process. It doesn't mean it's the right thing.
I have a former boss who used to say there's nothing worse than a perfectly executed bad plan.
It's true.
It resonates with me all the time. right? And you're right. You can run through the process and the process will be good. But unless there are people asking questions along the way,
Yeah.
a lot of the great ideas and things that have happened had nothing to do with the process. Just had a great idea. And that's risky too,
Mhm.
because then people think that, well, this guy did it or this girl did it, and this is what happened, and I can do the same thing. And they don't realize, well, this was a moment in time. Consumer behaviors were this way, market conditions were they, interest rates were this way, availability of capital was this way. And we had this window where retailers were looking for this. They just think they're brilliant. And the truth is it was a moment in time.
It's true. All right. So, question I ask everybody:
Yes, sir.
who in your career
Hmm.
has had an impact on your life, and what do they do? What do they teach you? What was that?
So two things, and one is going to sound like it is staged, but I was raised, Braden, in an amazing environment. My parents never fought. It's not that they agreed on everything. I never saw a fight. If there was something, they went back to the room and they discussed it and they came out very united.
Mm.
Divorce was never talked about. They had incredible respect for each other. I was taught two things that I remember so vividly. Well, I'll tell you one bad story on myself, but two things. One was I could say anything I wanted to so long as I was respectful. That was drummed into me. And today, when I do something that is disrespectful, it really bothers me.
Mm.
And the other thing I remember my mom telling me over and over again is that you can do anything you want to, honey. I believe. Now, the funny story is I was about 15 and I had a smart mouth. I'm certain that I'd have probably knocked my teeth out, right? My mom come waddling down the hall. That's bad because she's not a big lady. But her heels, boom, 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 boom. She put her finger right in the middle of my chest and she said, young man, your attitude is interfering with your father and I's relationship. We've been together before you came to this earth, and we'll be together when you leave this house. And you have no right being in that position. Do you understand me? For reasons I know you're aware of, but I won't explain, for religious reasons, my parents were very grounded in religion, and truthfully, I valued that. But I decided I didn't want to be their religion that caused problems. But I wrote them a letter in the last couple of months and told them how much I appreciated them as parents. And as I look around other people, either I was born with a certain amount of self-confidence or calmness or whatever, but also I'm not going to give that to that. I give God lots of credit, but I have to say my parents molded what I was born with. And so my parents, I wasn't sure I would say that. But the truth is they were very influential because my value structure, how I talk to my wife, how we run our household, how I treat my grandkids, the president that I am, were written in a foundation of which they and that belief structure helped to begin with. So that would be number one. Number two is a man that I called on in West Texas. His name was Mike Young. And Mike Young was a big man, big man, big man. And Karen and I took he and his wife Kay one year to the Indianapolis 500, and I had to buy him 2 seats. That'll tell you how big he is. But he was the head buyer, and I was calling on him. And I don't know why, but he really took a liking to me, and I'm so glad that he did. And I was young. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and full of ambition, full of ambition. And I'd call over and I'd want an appointment with them. And it got to be after 6 months or so that I didn't get to decide. His assistant would call over and tell me when my appointment was on Friday afternoon. Sorry. And it was always the last appointment on a Friday. And so we'd have our business conversation, and he, in his very deep Texas voice, he'd say, Mitchell, how's Karen? How's Micah? How's Chad? How's Sarah? How's Morgan? And it was his way of making sure that I stayed grounded in the things that were important. And about 10, 15 years ago, he died of brain cancer. But he was a great man. And I think back that, and he had one other saying. He said to me one day, I was wanting to do something, and he said to me, Mitchell, son, you're going to have to learn the difference between come here and sick 'em, because today you don't know the difference. And I think that, and he was a very values-based man, and he was a good man, and he took care of his family, but it was also his way of, I know he appreciated my ambition, but it was his way of grabbing a hold of my belt and making sure, don't run faster than your family, and don't run faster than what's most important.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, Todd, this is, I feel like we could talk forever, but this has been amazing. We'll have to do it again.
Love that.
Let me know. And for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you, CPG Brand Builders. If you're not a member yet, you got to join Todd and I. It is a fantastic community. You're going to absolutely love it. So make sure you hit subscribe. Don't miss any of the content. Sign up, be a member. We'd love to have you. And Todd, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It was awesome.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.